Hey, welcome to Hannity, and this is a Fox News alert. The Baltimore Sun has reportedly obtained Freddie Gray's autopsy, and the report reveals that Freddie Gray sustained a, quote, high-energy injury while being transported in a police van. Now, Freddie Gray was arrested back in April and reportedly suffered fatal injuries while in police custody. His death then set off a wave of violent protests in the city of Baltimore. Joining us now to explain what this all means, forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden is with us. Dr. Baden, let's first go single high-energy injury to the neck and spine. In other words, and they think it happened when there was a deceleration of the automobile.
Right.
So that goes against what a lot of what had been theorized by people, that this all happened before he got into the van. As a matter of fact, they say it didn't happen then.
Yeah, well, that's an interpretation that's in the article. But the actual finding of where the injury was, what part of the neck and the spinal cord was injured, is not only dependent on the autopsy report, but on the 7 days of treatment while he was in the hospital. And the hospital report also has to be released to correlate it with the autopsy and be specific about where in the spinal cord there was an injury. And that tells you whether it can possibly cause death or partial paralysis or not. And that hasn't been, that's not been released.
Well, we do know from one of the other prisoners in the van at the time, Dr. Baden, that after the doors were closed, he could be heard yelling and banging, causing the van to rock. Could that be the same as what they are stating here, a sudden deceleration or a single high-energy impact to the neck and spine? Could that have done it?
That's what's being put forth, but the evidence for it, the reason that we do an autopsy, Sean, is because witness statements aren't always accurate, and the autopsy has to independently determine what happened, and independent of what the witnesses say, and the autopsy has to correlate the findings with the hospital
let me go backwards
record.
here. Okay, so what they're saying in this autopsy report is it's a single high-energy injury to the neck and spine. Also, the autopsy did note that after the doors were closed, he could be heard yelling and banging, causing the van to rock. I'm asking you, could that description that they put in the autopsy, could that result in a single high-energy injury?
It's possible, but very unusual under those circumstances. And what the newspaper article is saying is what's been reported in the press before, but from the witnesses. It doesn't give, that report doesn't describe exactly what happened from the autopsy. The autopsy says where the injury to the spinal cord is, and then I can answer your question a little better.
All right. Well, the state medical examiner's office concluded that it couldn't be ruled an accident, but was a homicide because the officers failed to follow safety procedures. So I guess my question to you
is unusual. You know, that's unusual. The autopsy findings tell you if it's a homicide or an accident. We're not lawyers. When we say homicide, we're not saying whether it's criminal or not. We can say homicide, it's not criminal in self-defense, for example.
All right, but what they're saying is that they surmise that he may have gotten his feet, was thrown into the wall during an abrupt change of direction. Now, at that point, does that show, in your mind, if you were called to the stand, if the autopsy actually says that he may have gotten to his feet and because of a change in direction or deceleration, does that sound like a depraved mindset as second-degree murder which is the charge against one of these officers, the driver?
But you see, here again, I'm not an expert on manslaughter, second degree, first degree. What I could say is it's possible that could happen, but whether it did happen or not can better be determined once we see the autopsy finding. And it was surprising to me that there's nothing in the autopsy report on what treatments and what happened and what the diagnosis was in the hospital, who had the live person, who did neurological exams, who examined the spinal cord of the brain. And I'd like to know what those doctors' determinations were, because they're equally as important as the autopsy.
The report does not note any previous injuries to his spine. And also, while bystanders captured the video, the autopsy concluded that he suffered no injuries, suggesting a neck hold stemming from a physical restraint. In many ways, Dr. Baden, I find that very exculpatory for the police, because if they're talking about a single high-energy injury to the neck or spine causing his death, then and that it happened out of police presence, there might be a civil suit or civil culpability in terms of, oh, they didn't put a seatbelt on. But I don't see any chance at that reaching a homicide level. But let me bring in Dr.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
If that was true. Yes.
Well, that's what the report says. I'm only reading from the report.
Yes.
Fox News legal analyst Arthur Aidala is with us from the Fox News Medical Aid team, and also Keith Abloh and former NYPD Detective Bo Dietl. Arthur Aidala, as I read this whole thing here, this seems quite exculpatory to me for the police officers. They're saying it's a single high-energy injury to the neck, and they're saying it happened while he was in the van out of police presence.
No, Sean, look, you hit the nail on the head when you asked Dr. Biden the question. Can you get a conviction on what they are saying here? In my opinion, you cannot. In my opinion, ladies and gentlemen of the audience, what should happen here is this case should go before a judge who uses common sense and reads this homicide report, looks at the totality of the circumstances. These facts do not support a charge of depraved heart murder. Where is the depravity? Because a police officer driving a van took a turn a little too hard or decelerated. That's what the medical examiner is finding. He decelerated, so he hit the brakes too hard. Does a police officer or any individual, does a reasonable person believe that if you hit your brakes too hard and someone's in the back of your van, it is likely to cause death?
One more legal question. But Arthur, we also have witnesses, and it's in the report, that he was throwing himself and throwing a tantrum in the back of that van and banging himself off the walls.
But, hey, Sean, although you may be right, I'm even saying something even more harsh. Even if you believe the medical report, even if it was a police officer who caused the death because they made the van stop too quickly, that does not support depraved heart murder. Depraved heart murder is, it's New Year's Eve and I'm going to test fire my rifle into the crowd of millions of people. That's depraved heart murder.
Let me get to Bo Dietl, but first I want to ask Dr. Bodden one more question. He tested. We just lost Dr. Bodden, but Bo, he did test positive for opiates and marijuana, I believe, when he was admitted to the trauma center, but yet they kept that out of the autopsy. Why would they do that? And why do you think Marilyn Mosby, I think I have a pretty good theory about why she didn't want to release this autopsy. I don't think it helps her case.
I think it's very important in the case. And this guy Goodson, Cesar Goodson, now is charged with second-degree murder, meaning that when he was driving that van, he knew by stopping short of whatever happened that he was going to die in that van. This is a ridiculous charge put on this guy. If anything in the world is he could have done this to himself, who's going to be the judge and the jury to see who caused that man's death? This is a very tough one. And right now, to overcharge like that, and if they're going to charge him with second-degree murder, you know what? They're going to lose this case.
Well, they already did. Let me go back to my good friend Arthur Aidala. Arthur, the only thing I see here might be a civil case. Okay, procedure is they should have belted him in. They failed to do so. You have a civil case in that instant. If there was a sudden deceleration, how do you prove that it was a, quote, rough ride, as some people will interpret this to be? You can't prove that the police officer consciously hit the brakes to hurt him, especially with the report that he was banging up against the walls himself.
So let's talk about the civil case, Sean, because you're right. There will be, as sure as I am bald, there will be a civil case. And what they're going to focus
full head of hair. I have no idea what you're talking about.
What they're going to focus on is what they said in the report. It was the lack of care that they gave to him after he was injured. There were 4 stops in the van, and after, I believe it's the 3rd one, they say he's kind of in a fetal position, curled up on the bench, and at that point, the police officers should have rendered more aid.
Right, let me
that goes to the civil. That goes to the civil.
Let me bring in Dr. Keith Abloh. Dr. Abloh, now that you factor in, although they kept it out of the autopsy, that when he first went to the hospital, and he was admitted to the Maryland Shock Trauma Center, he tested positive for opiates and other drugs in his system. Would that cause somebody perhaps to act in a way as described by the other prisoner, and that he could be banging back and forth?
Well, sure, it could, Sean, because it alters his mental status. And speaking of mental status, are we really prepared to believe that officers who generally are relied upon to support the community, that they get it in their minds that they're going to kill someone by driving in an erratic way a guy who's used marijuana and opiates, that their method of killing him is going to be to drive hard left and hard right? That's literally what the charges.
Sean,
I got 10 seconds. Go ahead.
We have to look at one thing. When they're dragging him to the van there, he seemed like he was not really, his legs weren't working too good.
But they addressed that.
Hold on.
But, Bo, I got to break because we're on a hard break here. But they addressed that and said it didn't happen then.
They said his legs did work.
I got to run. Thank you all.